We're up to mitzvah 116. This is mitzvah saseh. It's a performative mitzvah number 49 in the Torah. It's on men, Tehanim, when we had the Beis Hamikdash. It's found in Vayikra Beis, Pasuk Aleph, Vayikra 2, chapter 2, first Pasuk. It says, V'nefesh kisak, this is found in the beginning of Vayikra. Also Parashas Vayikra. V'nefesh kisak riv karban mincha. When a person brings this is talking about mincha as a meal offering. It's made out of flour. So it's a mitzvah to perform the different avodah, the different process of bringing a meal offering, like the way the Torah says. Now, there are 3 different meal offerings that were brought for the entire community. One was, we call this one of the minchas was the challahs that were brought, right, every Shabbos, with the lechem upon it. Another one was the oimer on Pesach. And another one was the shtei alechem, the 2 loaves that were brought on Shavuos. Now, an individual can end up bringing 9 different types of a mincha. That's the way it's described in the Mishnah. Some of the meal offerings, some of the minchas were very fine wheat flour, while some were made out of barley. Barley was considered food of an animal food. That's why it starts off. All right, good. Now, some of the minchas were eaten by the Kahanim, except for a handful. They would take something called a kaimetz. Kaimetz was, Kohen would grab it, a handful, and they would, whatever was between these fingers, these 3 fingers, the kmitza, clean it off here, and that amount. And the rest could be eaten was to be eaten by the Kahanim. That had to be burned on the Mizbeach, this amount, but some of the minchas were burned completely. Now, all the meal offerings could not be chametz, except for one, which was the shtei alechem, those 2 challahs that were brought on Shavuos, but everything else was non-chametz. It wasn't a question of gebrux or anything like that. It was just not chametz. Okay?
What about carbon toda?
Carbon toda, that's what we just said. Oh, any carbon toda. Oh, so it says that there were certain loaves were also had to be chametz. That's right. Okay. Now, what was the procedure that you brought a carbon mincha? How did that work? It was like this. Person would bring fine flour from the house in some type of a vessel, a container, bring it to the kohen. The kohen would take a portion of flour, like we said, this kamitza, and brush off the extra from his thumb, and then the little finger. It was called a kaimetz. That was burnt to the mizbeach, and the rest was then eaten by the kahanim. Now, this mincha was known as like a carbon of an ani, a poor man's carbon. Because if the guy wasn't able to bring a bird as a carbon, then, for sure not an animal, the least of the carbonis was this mincha, was flour. So you could have an animal, a bird, or flour. And like the same thing, everybody brought a carbon. Now, someone talked about it being a good business to have, selling animals near the Beis Hamikdash. It was also part of this, was the same. Now, this was considered more precious to Hashem than any other karbonos. It says, that's why it's called, it says, if you look in the first word, it says, V'nefesh ki sakriv karbon mincha. The Lashon, it says, when a soul. The whole point of bringing a carbon was not just, I got to do this. It was something that came out, no one's going to know necessarily if you did or not. They say, you didn't bring your carbon, we're going to come after you. There was no carbon police. This is a person that wanted to get close to Hashem, come back home. So, using this carbon was a means to get back home, to get back closer to Hashem. So, Mela, it shows when it says by the mincha, v'nefesh ki sakriv, it means that this was a special closeness that a poor person had. He wanted to bring a carbon, but he couldn't afford a regular, animal or a bird, so therefore he brought flour.